So hello, everybody. So nice to have you here. So today we're going to talk about the future of independent expertise in Canada. We're hoping you're going to participate, but if you don't wish to, and you just want to hear us talk, perfectly fine with that. I'm just going to get us set up. I'm Tracy Vinecourt. I'm a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair at the University of Ottawa. And I'm also the chair of the COVID-19 Task Force. So today, we'll see how these slides move. There is a bit of an issue with them moving. Okay. So starting off with stress is always good. It helps with digestion, I hear. So here I'll introduce our panel. First of all, we have Philip Crowley. Philip, if you don't mind showing your hand. So Philip's a recently retired publisher of the Globe and Mail. We also have Jerry McNeil, past president of the Royal Society of Canada and Department of Biology at Western University. And then next we have Samira Mubareka, who's a medical microbiologist, infectious disease physician at Sunnybrook Health Sciences. And then we have Julia Wright, who is the George Monroe Chair in Literature and Rhetoric and is a professor of English at Dalhousie University, and of course myself. So I'm just going to give us an overview of what we've done with the Royal Society of Canada's task force. We've accomplished a lot. You can see around the room the covers of our reports. In March 2020, the president, Dr. McNeil, and the board of directors established the task force for the Royal Society on COVID-19. And really the point of this was to support Canadians with accurate information about our response and our recovery to the pandemic. In April 2020, a strategic partnership was launched with the Globe and Mail, and this is actually the only partnership between a national academy and a national newspaper in the world. And this extended our reach of independent expertise. In September, we have statistics up to September 2023, we're still ongoing, but we need to get our slides in and organized. We've had over 350,000 briefing downloads of the reports you see around the room. We've had over 100 op-eds with the Globe and Mail, and they've been very well received. We've had COVID-19 themed art projects that first began online and then are now found in galleries across Canada. And we also had at least 25 meetings between the task force members and public officials. So we were consulting at all levels with the World Health Organization, with our chief scientists in Canada. We were there and we were providing our expertise. In January 2021, the Royal Society of Canada and the Globe and Mail organized a series of virtual town halls on COVID-19 vaccines that were open to all Canadians. And we had over 10,000 Canadians participate. We had webinars that were very well received, from vaccines to schools, and really interesting just about schools, because we were talking early about school closures, and today in the New York Times opinion is a big reportage about the effect of school closures during the pandemic on children's learning. And most recently, we've had a series with the British Medical Journal, very well received, between the Royal Society of Canada and BMJ, and we were looking at our response specifically in Canada to the COVID-19 pandemic. We still have a few that are coming out. We have some reports that are just on the way or just out. So we have our urgent, sorry, I can't see from here, long overdue. So this is the, we have the drug discrimination in Canada coming out. We have an update on the long-term care. Julia's group pulling out another report. I'll leave you to say that. And then we have one last straggler that's going to come out in April. It's a partnership between the Royal Society of Canada and the Canadian Commission of UNESCO, and it's on learning loss. We're going to be talking about this, but I'm just going to set the conversation with this. So the Pew report just came out with a report, and the title was Americans' Trust in Scientists, positive views of science continue to decline. And basically what they showed was that the view of scientists before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now after the pandemic has declined. So it was fairly positive before COVID-19. It took a little hit during the pandemic, not to suggest the pandemic's not over, but when we were in the throes of it, and now it's lower than it's ever been. So we'll be discussing this at length. Okay, so we're up next, right, Jeremy?
I guess I am.
Okay.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to say because everything you've said, I was planning to say. So I can just sit down and say thank you and go back and eat my lunch. I don't know how many of you remember, but as a candidate for the presidency of the Royal Society, every candidate has to write a brief of what you want to do if and when you become elected. And I had three things that I put down. One was to broaden the scope of the Royal Society and its activities regionally, modeling on the Atlantic RSC, trying to get officially ones across Canada. The second was to engage at other levels to ensure that the expertise of the Royal Society reach a broader section of our communities, and actually mentioned Let's Talk Science. And the third was raise money. Well, very little of that happened because obviously we then had COVID-19. And with a discussion, the first thing we did was to contact the other two academies and say, why don't we all get together, provide the names and contact our fellows, and then provide a list of names to the appropriate government agencies of people who are willing to be contacted if they needed expertise in those fields. So that was a very simple thing to do. Everybody said yes. If they want me and want to talk about X, Y, or Z, I'm happy to be there. That was fine. But then we thought, okay, we should move forward. We should be doing something more concrete. And that was the genesis of the COVID-19 task force. Interestingly, at the time, there was less interest from the other two academies to move forward on this issue, possibly because there was no money on the table. It was just a question, we better do it. And so what the Royal Society did, and many of you will remember, we got in touch with all of the fellows and said, name three things that are the most important that the RSC should be addressing as it relates to COVID-19 and Canada. And of course, but we also put a rider in, not your research, maybe your research, but not just yours, because that can happen. Well, it turned out we got an amazing response from the fellowship and from the college, obviously. I'm sorry, when I think of the RSC as one big package, and the college is a very important part of it. We got a remarkable response, and we ended up, the staff at Walter House then went through, and we started looking at several of the themes. And we started obviously with the very first one that came out, which was on long-term care, because obviously it was in the headlines of the paper. We really, as a country, did not do very well. And by the way, the follow-up report was actually released this week at the G7. And so the report is now is available. Does anybody have a copy that we can wave around? So that was the case there. But as was mentioned, indirectly, we ended up doing two of the things that I really wanted to do as president, not knowing there was going to be COVID-19. And the first was that we did work with Let's Talk Science. We got a major grant where the experts from the Royal Society could provide the arm's length realistic information that would go into the programs, into the schools. At the same time, we ended up connecting with the Globe and Mail. We then reached another segment of the society, both through the op-eds, the webinars that were made, and the same with Let's Talk Science. And we want to see this enthusiasm moving forward, because we now have the new task force, which is called One Health. And in being an ecologist, I see it, I'm talking about the health of the globe and every species that lives on it. And I would like to encourage anybody that is interested in moving forward in this way, providing information or setting up to be willing to run, set up a policy statement or writing op-eds on any of the points. And it isn't, for example, we've already got one that hopefully will come out in the new year that will be the start of the publications from this new task force that is relating to microbiomes, gut microbiomes, but not just human beings, from bees to all sorts of other animals, and how we can use this knowledge to improve the health of all sorts of organisms and indirectly to ourselves. Another one is on the health of freshwater resources in Canada. So we're interested in any different subject that can come forward, and Sam will be talking about this more. But I think we have shown that the Royal Society was able to move forward. And when you think about it, we engaged over 700 scientists in these reports, and only a third of them were fellows. The thing is, we were able to reach out, and we had enough recognition, I think, where people were willing to move and engage with us. And we put out a wonderful series of reports, and the number of downloads and so on, and the citations already, and the changes that have been made from those recommendations show that we as a Royal Society have the capacity, and we need to build on this and move forward. So on that, I would encourage anybody that has an idea, please get in touch with Darren or the rest of the Walter House crew or myself so that we can help move things forward. And I've already had one idea, which I think is absolutely great, that I should be meeting with the heads of the 3 granting agencies, as they are members, to move forward on how we can work together with all the scholars that they have in, I mean, they fund us all, whether it's in the arts, the humanities, social sciences, and the sciences. So moving together to ensure that Canadians get arm's length, valuable information is important, and it has to be at arm's length. It's important because there are a lot of misinformation out there, and if we can provide a service, which we should be doing, we need to do it. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I've just joined the board of the RSC this morning, so very honored to do that. Thank you. It was a very, very exciting AGM, as you can imagine. I'm also delighted to see someone from Sunnybrook here, because I've just become chair of the foundation board at Sunnybrook. So, having one of the stars of Sunnybrook on the panel today is also very good. So talking about this partnership that the Globe and the RSC formed, from my point of view as CEO publisher, it was a smart business decision. We do things sometimes for altruism. We support charities who need some oxygen. We do things that are, we hope, in the public good. But this, as far as I was concerned, was a way of increasing the credibility of the Globe and Mail. Trust is there on that slide. And I can tell you, if I was showing a slide about trust in the media, it would look dramatically worse than that. It would look like a hockey stick in the wrong direction. And that has been a problem for a number of years, but it has accelerated greatly since the arrival of Donald Trump on the political scene, and the phenomenon of fake news and the issues that go with that. So I was talking to the university research chiefs this morning, and I think one of the biggest problems we have as a society, and it's not just in Canada, is there is a threat to democracy, because there is less and less trust in what people are reading whether they're reading on a screen, whether they're reading in print, which is a diminishing amount, what they're picking up on social media, it becomes very much more of a problem of credibility. So what the partnership offered to me as a CEO of the business was, this is going to add to the authority of what we do. Our business is about subscriptions. 66% of our revenue comes from people paying for either digital or print subscriptions. So it's not advertising anymore. So if people have greater belief, greater faith in what they're reading, they're more likely to keep on paying for it. That's the simple equation. So probably a high degree of skepticism on both sides when this partnership was formed, because typically there would be some natural skepticism in the academic community about how well they could work with a newspaper. And in our newsroom, there might be skepticism about whether the material that we would be getting would be remotely interesting to our readers. Could we make it something that they really wanted to do? Well, the numbers tell the story. We're pretty good at collecting data. We've got very good data science capability. So we gather data on the readership. We have about 7 million people reading the Globe on an average day. A lot of people getting it for free, but also people paying subscriptions. Half the content is free, half of it is behind a paywall. So people are really looking for value for money. And I think they got value for money out of the RSC content. 100 op-eds is pretty phenomenal over a course of a couple of years. That's because it was really good stuff. It was extending people's ability to understand what was going on at a very scary time. Remember when COVID happened, it was pretty much an unprecedented story that nobody had had to deal with before. SARS was the nearest thing that we could refer to. So our 7 million audience number went up to 12 million, pretty much overnight. The avid interest, the what the hell is going to happen here, how are we going to deal with this, is the government right, daily press conferences with the medical officer of health from whichever province or the federal government. Remember, you were being bombarded with this every day, and it became addictive. So every major media companies had this huge spike. So for us, we already had some expertise, and it's why the RSC, I think, felt confident coming to us, because we've got the ability to hire expert writers. Ivan Semeniuk, writing on science, one of the few people in Canada who is capable of interpreting very complex subjects to a lay audience, and he does that on all kinds of subjects. André Picard, writing about health policy, writing about what the decisions that were being taken about by various levels of government. That was being extremely well read. The data told its story. So what really worked is that the trust level between the RSC and the Globe just kept on growing. And congratulations to Darren Gilmore and his team for making that work, because there was a lot of relationship management, a lot of communication, making sure the two sides got to know each other and work together. So that was very successful, and I think it absolutely paid off, because what our audience got, our audience at the Globe is a pretty intelligent audience. They're well educated. They're concerned citizens. They're worried about what's going on in the country at any time, but particularly during COVID. They found they were getting a richer experience because they were getting access to what you were doing during this period. And it wasn't just about vaccines, although that was obviously top of mind for a lot of people. It was also about so many of the consequences. If you look around these pages, which, by the way, are very well designed, they cover a lot of topics which are hot topics outside of COVID. Homelessness, immigration, impact on schools, impact on higher education, all sorts of topics which were very relevant to what Canadians were concerned about. And you bring an expertise, and this is, I'm going to get to the title of this. This is the value of independent expertise. And let me come back to that independence. RSC is seen to be absolutely clean and clear of commercial influence. It is trustworthy. It is a source that Canadians, if they know about it at all, they trust it. The Globe has been owned by the Thompson family for 3 generations. And Roy Thompson, when he founded the business back in the 1930s in local radio in Timmins, wrote something which was his credo back then, which we still live with. And that is editorial freedom, editorial independence, nobody telling the editor what to do. So that independence that the RSC brings, that independence of its objective analysis of what's going on, is adding to what we feel is very important as to what our audience look for. If you want a particular political point of view, there are other ways of getting that. You can read the National Post because it's relentlessly right-wing every day. They have about 6 columnists writing the same opinion every day. But I'll not go into that. If you want to watch TV, you can watch until recently, you could watch Fox News and you would know what you'd be getting there, and it would be a very similar diet every day. So you make those choices. What we believe in at the Globe and Mail is that you provide a variety of opinions and you let people make up their mind. You'll give them a choice. You give them different points of view. The newspaper might have a point of view on a particular thing, and we say it in the editorial, but there's lots of opinions in the paper. So the RSC brought lots of that wisdom, lots of that context, and I think it worked as a partnership. But the problem is, the Globe and Mail is a relatively small part of the Canadian audience, and your ability to reach the much larger Canadian population is limited by the fact that most of the Canadian media are in trouble. If you're in the newspaper business and you're working for some of the big companies like Postmedia or Torstar, you're working for companies that are in pretty serious financial trouble, and therefore they are weaker than they were. They're weaker than they desperately reduced newsrooms that are. Ottawa Citizen used to have 200 journalists. It now has about 30. So that's just one example. I'm not going to pick on Calgary this time. It's all right. You can repeat that story across the country. As a result, they do not have experts. They don't have an Ivan Simonek. They don't have an Henri Picard. So when you're dealing with the local paper, you're dealing with generalists who've got no expertise in the subject, and you've then got to educate them to build that relationship. That requires a leap of faith from your point of view. As scientists, as academics, if you don't trust the person you're talking to, that's a problem. It's trust again. So can we replicate this model in other parts of the world? We talked about that this morning. There are other countries who are thinking, okay, if Canada can do this, can we do it in Australia, for instance? It's finding the right media partner, and there'll be many I would advise against partnering with. I wouldn't trust them. It's back to trust. So you've got to have that independence on both sides for it to work. But I think what's happened over the last few years has proved something to me, and it's why I'm now on the board. I think we've got something very good going on here, and I think we can build on it. I think we can continue to try and reach out to a larger audience across Canada, make people more and more aware of just some of the fact is Canada has a very high and good reputation in the shape of the RSC, what it stands for. That's something we can build on. and we can, I think, continue to work together very well. So I'm hopeful of that. I'm not running the Globe and Mail. It's not my decision to do that, but I still am involved with the Thompson family. So I have some influence on that. But anyway, I'll stop talking and sit down, and any comments, questions later. Thank you.
I'd like to start by thanking the Walterhouse team and Jeremy and the members of the task force and all the experts who lended their work to the work of the task force over the last 3.5 years. I think the work of the task force not only produced a lot of excellent information and made it accessible to the public in ways that was extremely useful in a difficult time, but we also showed what we can do when we work together for something good that is beyond ourselves. So the last 2 policy briefings I've done for the task force argue for more robust interdisciplinarity and better protected pipelines for communicating expert advice. So I want to spend, can I get my first slide? There it is, thank you. Better protected pipelines for communicating expert advice. So I want to spend my time here drawing on that context to think about those aspects of the task force itself. Being a humanities scholar, I'm going to telescope out and give some context before I go back in. Interdisciplinarity is far from new. The OED dates the word back to at least 1937, and David Sills finds earlier examples tracing arguments for it back to the end of World War I, what we might also recognize as the early part of the great influenza pandemic. We now have a full century of policy and scholarly discussions of how and why we should be more interdisciplinary and what that might mean. In his report on knowledge for Quebec universities in the 1970s, Jean-François Lyotard suggests the idea of an interdisciplinary approach is specific to the age of delegitimation and its hurried empiricism. The relation to knowledge is not articulated in terms of the realization of the life of the spirit or the emancipation of humanity, but in terms of the users of a complex conceptual and material machinery and those who benefit from its performance capabilities. In other words, generate outputs faster rather than make things better in myriad ways, including through such intangibles as inclusion, awareness, and joy. Delegitimation is a better term than misinformation for capturing the broader loss of confidence in our institutions, running the gamut from fairly ludicrous conspiracy theories to reasonable concerns about government decision-making on a wide range of issues, from the pandemic, children's rights, and the environment to plain old corruption. Annual surveys from Pew are showing declining trust in institutions, and this is being reflected culturally. The pandemic-era Batman film, released in 2022, includes a speech on the need to rebuild trust in institutions. The delegitimation of expertise can look specific rather than general. We hear a lot about the crisis in the humanities these days, but it too is an old formulation. After a withering 1956 essay on the low state of the humanities, a conference was held on the theme, The Crisis in the Humanities in the South in Mississippi in April 1959. In France in 1958, Fernand Braudel started an essay, There's a General Crisis in the Human Sciences. In Israel in 1960, biologist and typhus researcher Ludwig Fleck wrote an essay on the crisis in science. All of these, in their way, considered crises of legitimacy, of sets of disciplines not being fit for purpose in the midst of the global conflicts, polarizing propaganda, and the existential dreads of the Cold War, all of which resonates with our own particular moment in ways I think we're only just beginning to contemplate. George Orwell argued in various texts that delegitimating expertise is a tool of such polarizing politics. He begins one essay in 1945, our civilization is decadent and our language, so the argument goes, must inevitably share in the general collapse. It follows that any struggle against the abuse of language is a sentimental archaism, like preferring candles to electric light. The devaluing of clear statements of evidence and principles is a strategy that serves propaganda and those threatened by transparency, accountability, diversity, and integrity. Fleck's 1960 essay on the crisis in science specifically urged a critical resistance to propaganda. Not long after Lyotard, early internet observers invoked the signal-to-noise ratio to discuss the rise of hostility and simple nonsense. The age of delegitimation is the age of noise. In today's jargon, we don't discuss ideas, we amplify or mute them. Instead of listening, we shout louder. Unfounded cries of big pharma against medical expertise are delegitimating noise. Representations of critical thinking and historical context as indoctrination are delegitimating noise. Using journal impact factors and knowledge mobilization metrics to assess the value of research can also be delegitimating noise. A research claim can be popular and influential but wrong, Wakefield, as we've often seen. A research claim that only a few experts know about can be groundbreaking and correct. Peer review and academic consensus are not perfect, but at least they're run by experts. We delegitimate academic expertise if we allow metrics that are not peer-reviewed and have in fact been widely critiqued, and we might consider the mountain of evidence on numerical teaching evaluations along the way. They aren't just weak evidence. Scholarship shows many are biased in favor of whiteness, maleness, English language scholarship, and some disciplines. Our processes must keep improving, but we must not accede to the claim that expertise is insufficient to assess academic merit. Without expertise, there can be no evidence-informed check on political discourse, as Orwell feared. Without a check on political discourse and expert analysis of decision-making and consequences, we will see more bad decisions, and so the further erosion of confidence in our public institutions, as well as more substantial harms. We will have to confront this in relation to COVID-19, whether through public inquiries as the BMG series advocated or otherwise. Various professional or research misconduct policies will be tested, are being tested, and perhaps revised. But these investigations must aim at better processes and structures. They must hold people and institutions to meaningful standards for the sake of the standards, not to find heroes or villains to splash across our screens. We need to think broadly and generatively about what is necessary at this historical moment to legitimate knowledge of various kinds and what it will mean if we don't. It is with this frame that I would suggest that the task force is much more than the sum of its outputs, although they are impressive. It was self-consciously interdisciplinary and diverse, for instance. True, working groups tended to be grounded in one tri-agency or another, but the task force itself, from the summer of 2020, included arts, humanities, social sciences, and sciences, creating in its regular meeting a robustly interdisciplinary space. Briefings and op-eds were also reviewed by experts from different disciplines. In ways too subtle to trace, these cross-disciplinary interactions likely strengthened our op-eds and webinars. Learning to talk to each other is a valuable first step to better communicating with the non-academic public. But it is more than that. Fleck suggested that, quote, every communication beyond the disciplines community alters the sense of notions, gives them a more or less new meaning, and can thus be a new source of ideas. The task force was also designed to serve the needs of legitimacy. First and foremost, there was peer review, but task force processes also drew on the legitimating power of oversight and openness. It was entirely overseen by the RSC as an independent national academy, and it worked on openness and not just through free online briefings, op-eds, and webinars. Working group information was also available online almost as soon as the group was struck, an important step towards transparency and accountability. Like open government, open research can be about principle, transparency about who is responsible and what standards we're applying, rather than shoveling out examples of content to see what sticks. Our policy briefing on expert advice thus recommend that all post-secondary institutions have an easily accessible webpage to inform the public on standard quality control mechanisms for academic research and education. Interdisciplinarity can develop without a shovel, without a project, without a grant application that requires the ticking of boxes. Recognizing that we are hearing not noise, but another discipline's signal is itself a quiet but necessary act of legitimation, of trust in our colleagues' signal, even if we don't fully understand it. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a story that pivots on the idea that speech most different from our own registers as noise, and Lyotard's translators use the same word, noise, to refer to the differences between disciplines. We can counter the age of noise, the age of delegitimation, by being better listeners. Individual acts of listening can help us bridge the gulfs that divide our disciplines and get us over the walls that would exclude knowledge systems such as those of Indigenous peoples. This is not about what we produce, but about opening up how we think, as Fleck noted. To conclude, I want to stress the importance of thinking about what academic legitimacy means in the 21st century if we are to push back the tide of mistrust, polarization, and confusion. Pandemics affect all aspects of human experience, making interdisciplinary analysis and solutions more obviously necessary, both in 1919 and today. But we need to find a way of making our pandemic interdisciplinarity more effective and enduring in the struggle for information and the more abstract struggle against the delegitimation of expertise. So that's about 8 minutes of the humanities. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, and many thanks to the RSC for supporting the work that everyone's been doing around the pandemic. I'll be talking about a couple of personal stories about the pandemic, and I should warn you about two things. Number one, these will be the nerdiest slides you will see today, and number two, some of these stories might be triggering a little bit.